The day had started like any other, the sun spilling soft golden light across the kitchen as I moved about, chopping vegetables and humming a tune that had been stuck in my head all morning. Everything felt ordinary, peaceful, almost comforting. I had been looking forward to a quiet evening with my son, a chance to catch up and share a meal together. He had invited his mother over, his grandmother, and I had hoped for a pleasant, civil evening. I had even gone out of my way to prepare her favorite dishes, thinking that small gestures might ease any tension that lingered between us. But there was an unease in the air that I could not shake, subtle but persistent, like the faint hum of an approaching storm. When she arrived, her presence filled the house like a shadow. She stepped through the doorway with a polite smile, but her eyes betrayed something far darker, an undercurrent of judgment, of scrutiny. She moved slowly, deliberately, watching every action I took, her gaze sharp and calculating. The warmth I had felt just moments ago evaporated, replaced by a prickling tension crawling along my skin. I tried to greet her with calmness and grace, to engage in light conversation, but every word felt like it bounced off an invisible wall. My son, sensing the growing unease, tried to break the ice with a few jokes, but even his laughter seemed forced, hollow, unable to penetrate the thick tension that had settled over the room. As I set the table, arranging the plates and silverware with care, I could feel her eyes on me, following each movement, measuring, judging. The familiar clink of cutlery and the soft hum of the stovetop felt distant, muted under the weight of her silent fury. Every smile I offered felt strained, every polite word rehearsed and fragile. My son's attempts to mediate fell flat, and I could sense his discomfort, the way he shifted nervously in his chair, as if waiting for a spark that might ignite the storm we all knew was lurking beneath the surface. The conversation, when it began, was stilted and polite, each sentence carefully chosen to avoid confrontation. Yet, there was a tension in the air, a friction that made every word seem heavier than it should. She asked questions in a tone that sounded innocent enough, but I could feel the subtle barbs hidden in her phrasing, the way her voice carried an edge of accusation, of disapproval. I answered cautiously, trying not to give her any reason to escalate, trying to maintain a fragile peace that seemed to hang by a thread. And then, as I passed her the soup, her hand brushed mine in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was nothing overt, but it carried a silent message, a challenge, a warning. I realized then that this was no ordinary visit. Something had been simmering beneath the surface for a long time, and that calm, polite dinner was merely the illusion before the storm. The air grew heavier, the light in the room sharper, the shadows darker. I could feel it in my bones, a sense of impending chaos that refused to be ignored. By the time we sat at the table, I understood that this was the calm before the unthinkable. The tension had reached its peak, a taut wire stretched so thin that the slightest touch might send it snapping. My heart raced, my hands trembled slightly, and I prayed that reason would prevail, that civility could hold back whatever anger she harbored. But deep down, a part of me knew that this was only the beginning. The storm had arrived, even if it had not yet revealed its full fury, and nothing in that moment could prepare me for what was about to happen. The dinner table, once carefully set and inviting, had become a battlefield of unspoken tension, each clink of cutlery echoing like a countdown to disaster. We tried to maintain the pretense of a normal meal, but the air was thick with unease, heavy with anticipation. My son spoke first, attempting to lighten the mood with a joke, but it landed awkwardly, swallowed by the sharp silence that followed. His mother's eyes, cold and unyielding, never left me. There was a fire simmering in them now, a dangerous intensity that made my stomach twist. I had seen disapproval before, passive-aggressive remarks, subtle digs, but there was something entirely different about this, something that felt deliberate, calculated, and uncontainable. It began with a careless comment, thrown like a pebble into a still pond. She remarked on the way I had prepared the meal, a statement so simple in words yet laced with venom in tone. I attempted to deflect it, to respond with calmness, hoping to de-escalate the rising tension. My voice wavered slightly, betraying the anxiety coiling within me, but it was enough to make her smirk, a slow, deliberate curl of her lips that sent a chill down my spine. She leaned forward slightly, her hand hovering near the soup pot, the gesture subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it, and my heart skipped a beat. Time seemed to slow, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Before I could react, her hand moved with sudden, shocking force. Hot soup arced through the air, the liquid catching the light in a cruel, glistening ribbon before colliding with my face. The pain was immediate, sharp, searing, a burning reminder that words alone were not her only weapon. The stench of the broth mixed with the sting of the scalding liquid, and I froze, unable to process the assault in that instant. My son leapt forward, shouting, his hands outstretched in frantic defense, but he was too late. The damage had already been done, and the chaos had begun. Shock paralyzed me at first, my mind unable to comprehend what had just occurred. Tears stung my eyes, mingling with the hot liquid still clinging to my skin, but the shock quickly gave way to a surge of anger that made my body tremble. My mouth opened, but words failed me. I could barely breathe, my chest tight with disbelief. Around me, the room seemed to distort. The warm, inviting colors of the kitchen now twisted into a surreal, hostile backdrop for what had become a violent, humiliating spectacle. Every second stretched endlessly, the moment replaying itself in slow motion as I registered the cruelty and audacity of her actions. My son's voice pierced the haze of pain and shock, shouting at his mother to stop, demanding an explanation that she refused to give. The tension escalated further, voices rising, accusations flying, but I felt a strange detachment, as though I were watching the scene unfold from outside my body. There was humiliation in the eyes of my family, disbelief mirrored in their faces, and a deep, gnawing sadness that such an ordinary evening had turned into a nightmare. The searing pain on my face was a physical reminder of the emotional wounds forming within me, wounds far deeper than any burn. I retreated from the table, seeking the safety of another room, the kitchen now a battlefield littered with shattered calm and broken trust. My hands still trembled, my face stung and smarted, and my mind raced through a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and hurt. I realized then that this act was no accident, no slip of the hand, it was deliberate, a statement meant to provoke, to humiliate, and to assert power. And yet, even as the anger roared within me, I knew that retaliation without thought would only escalate the chaos further. Somewhere, deep in the storm of pain and fury, I understood that I needed a plan, a measured response, a way to regain control before the damage spiraled beyond repair. The night was far from over, and I could sense that what had begun as a simple act of aggression was only the opening salvo in a conflict that could define the balance of our family. My heart pounded, my mind raced, but one thing was certain. This was not the end, and the story was only beginning. After the chaos of the dinner, I found myself alone in the quiet of the living room, the sting of the hot soup still lingering on my skin, the pain both physical and emotional pressing heavily against my chest. I sank into the sofa, wrapping my arms around myself as though I could contain the whirlwind of thoughts spinning inside my head. Tears blurred my vision, not just from the burn, but from the shock, the humiliation, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, the arc of the soup, her expression as she flung it, the horror on my son's face, and each replay tightened the knot of anger and disbelief that twisted inside me. At first, I wanted to lash out, to confront her immediately, to let the fury that burned inside me spill over and force her to acknowledge the pain she had caused. But the longer I sat in silence, the clearer it became that reaction alone would not solve anything. Reacting in rage would only feed her aggression, escalate the situation, and potentially destroy the fragile threads of family bonds that still existed. I needed strategy, composure, a way to reclaim control without losing myself in the fire of anger. I needed to think, to plan, to turn the tables with calm and measured precision rather than impulsive emotion. I reflected on her motives, trying to understand why she had acted with such hostility. Was it jealousy, resentment, a desire to dominate my son's life, or a deep-seated grudge against me? Each possibility twisted my stomach in knots, but I refused to let speculation dictate my next move. Instead, I focused on the facts, their behavior, the timing, the underlying tension that had built over months, if not years. I realized that this was not just about a single outburst or a moment of cruelty, it was about power, respect, and boundaries that had been ignored for far too long. I also thought of my son, torn between loyalty to his mother and his need to protect me, and my heart ached for the pressure he must have felt. I knew that any decision I made now would ripple through the family, affecting relationships that I wanted to preserve, but also challenging me to assert my own dignity and self-respect. I could no longer allow fear, hesitation, or politeness to define my boundaries. It was time to take action, but with care, strategy, and unwavering resolve. With a trembling hand, I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen as I debated who to call first. The decision was weighty. One wrong word, one poorly chosen tone, and the fragile opportunity for resolution could collapse entirely. I took a deep breath, letting the heat from my anger and the sting from the soup fade into a steely clarity. This call could change everything, but only if I approached it with precision, calm, and confidence. I began to form the words in my mind, rehearsing a tone that was firm yet composed, unapologetic yet measured, a voice that commanded attention without aggression. I knew I could not control her, nor her reaction, but I could control myself, my words, my tone, and the strength I projected. This was my moment to reclaim authority, to define the boundaries that had been trampled, and to make clear that such behavior would never again be tolerated. I thought of the consequences, the possible fallout, but also the relief and respect that would follow if I succeeded. As I finally dialed the number, my heart pounded in rhythm with my thoughts, and I felt a mix of fear, anticipation, and a strange surge of power. This was no longer just about the soup, the humiliation, or even the anger. It was about standing tall in the face of disrespect, asserting my worth, and demonstrating that composure and courage could turn a crisis into control. The line rang once, twice, and then a voice answered. I swallowed the lump in my throat, straightened my posture, and spoke, the words deliberate, the tone unwavering. In that moment, I realized that the storm might have started with her, but I had the power to direct its course from here on out. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I listened to the line ring, each pulse of sound echoing in my chest like a drumbeat of anticipation. My heart raced, my mind a whirlwind of fear, anger, and determination, but beneath it all lay a thread of resolve I had never known before. This call would not be an emotional outburst, nor a plea for apology. It would be a declaration of boundaries, a moment to reclaim control, and perhaps, if I spoke wisely, the start of a fragile reconciliation. I took a deep breath, willing my trembling hands to steady, and prepared to speak with calm authority. When she finally answered, her voice carried the usual edge, laced with casual irritation that barely masked the simmering hostility from earlier. I paused, letting my composure settle around me like armor, and then began to speak. My words were deliberate, clear, and firm, carefully chosen to convey not just my anger, but the seriousness of what had occurred. I described the incident calmly yet vividly, ensuring she understood the gravity of her actions without letting my voice break under the weight of emotion. I did not scream, I did not accuse wildly, but each phrase carried a quiet force, a power born from composure and conviction rather than fury. As I spoke, I noticed a shift in her tone, almost imperceptible at first, but undeniable, a hitch in her voice, a hesitation that betrayed a flicker of guilt. I pressed on, articulating the impact of her behavior on me, on my son, and on the fragile bonds that held our family together. I outlined the boundaries I would no longer allow to be crossed, making it clear that such acts of aggression were unacceptable and would have consequences if repeated. The call was not a confrontation meant to shame, but a statement of truth, a demonstration that I would not be intimidated or diminished. Her responses began cautiously, her usual confidence shaken by the unexpected calm and authority in my voice. I could hear her considering, weighing, realizing perhaps for the first time that the actions she had taken were neither clever nor harmless. They were destructive, cruel, and unacceptable. I remained unwavering, my words steady, my tone controlled, allowing no room for manipulation, guilt-tripping, or deflection. Each sentence reinforced my dignity, each phrase reminded her that I was neither powerless nor afraid, that I commanded respect simply by refusing to give in to fear or anger. At moments, she attempted to speak over me, to justify, to minimize, but I held firm, listening but not yielding, letting her realize that control had shifted. For the first time, she seemed aware of the consequences of her behavior beyond the immediate act, sensing the authority I had quietly assumed in that conversation. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten. I simply spoke truth with unwavering conviction, allowing my composure to speak louder than anger ever could. By the time I ended the call, the atmosphere had shifted in ways that were almost tangible. I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration, the tension in my shoulders easing as if some unseen weight had been lifted. On the other end, I imagined, she was left to reckon with the reality that I would not be bullied, intimidated, or humiliated again. The power dynamic had changed, subtly yet irreversibly, and I could feel it even through the lingering echoes of the call. I set the phone down, breathing deeply, allowing the adrenaline and fear to ebb. The room seemed brighter somehow, calmer, as if the act of speaking my truth had released not just the tension between us, but the storm that had been building inside me for so long. In that moment, I understood something crucial. Sometimes, one call, delivered with courage, clarity, and composure, can reshape relationships, restore dignity, and begin to heal wounds that once seemed impossible to mend. I had faced the storm and emerged not only unbroken, but stronger, more certain, and more resolute than ever before. To breathe again, as if the storm that had erupted at dinner had finally passed. The air felt lighter, the atmosphere warmer, yet the memory of that night lingered, a sharp reminder of the fragility of trust and the intensity of conflict. My face, still tinged with the sting from the hot soup, mirrored more than just a physical pain. It reflected the emotional scars, the tension, and the humiliation I had endured. But alongside those reminders, there was also a sense of power, of regained control, and the quiet satisfaction of having faced a test that could have broken me but did not. The MIL's behavior began to shift in ways that were subtle but undeniable. Her usual sharpness, the underlying hostility that had seemed ever present, softened gradually. Apologies, awkward and tentative at first, came in the form of words and gestures, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of self-awareness in her eyes. The call I had made, the calm yet unwavering declaration of boundaries, had left an imprint. She could no longer act with impunity, and though her pride was bruised, respect began to emerge from the cracks. I noticed the small changes. She lingered less in judgment, spoke with less accusation, and gradually, a tentative civility returned to our interactions. My son, who had been caught in the middle of our conflict, began to understand the full depth of what had occurred. He had witnessed the chaos, the pain, and the anger, but through my measured response, he also saw the strength and clarity that could arise from composure and courage. The balance of power in our household had shifted, and he recognized the importance of standing by me, of ensuring that respect and dignity were not just abstract concepts but living principles within our family. Conversations with him became more open, honest, and collaborative. He asked questions, sought my guidance, and slowly, we rebuilt the trust that had been strained by the violence of that night. Even as the household began to heal, I remained vigilant. Boundaries, once blurred, were now clearly defined and unwavering. I knew that forgiveness did not mean erasing the past, but it did mean creating a space where growth, understanding, and reconciliation could exist. The MIL's transformation, though gradual, was real, and I allowed myself to accept her tentative gestures of remorse without cynicism. It was a delicate dance, a balance of caution and openness, but it was one I was ready to perform because it was necessary for the long-term health of our family. In this new equilibrium, I discovered something profound about strength and empowerment. True power, I realized, did not come from anger, retaliation, or loud confrontation. It came from composure, clarity, and the courage to act decisively in moments of crisis. One measured call, spoken with intention and control, had shifted the entire dynamic of our relationships. It had created space for respect, understanding, and even the possibility of forgiveness. I had faced humiliation, pain, and aggression, yet I emerged not broken, but stronger, more confident, and deeply aware of my own worth. Life did not instantly return to perfect normalcy. Memories of the incident occasionally flared, a reminder that trust can be fragile and that respect must be maintained. But the atmosphere in the house was no longer oppressive. Laughter returned, meals became pleasant again, and my son and I found solace in each other's company. The mill, cautiously but sincerely, began to respect the boundaries I had set, and a tentative peace settled over our home. I realized that sometimes, a single moment, a single call, a single decision, can alter the course of relationships, heal wounds, and transform conflict into empowerment. In the end, the storm had passed, leaving behind lessons etched into my heart. I had learned the value of composure, the importance of asserting boundaries, and the quiet but undeniable power of courage. Our family emerged not just intact, but stronger, more aware, and more resilient. What had begun as a night of chaos and pain had become a story of growth, strength, and unexpected peace. I had faced the unthinkable and, through calm determination, had turned a moment of humiliation into a triumph of dignity and self-respect.